So, you have chosen to follow the path of a gunslinger. If you enjoy throwing knives at your foes' skulls and being able to wield a massive golden revolver that disintegrates large foes, then this guide is for you. This video should cover everything that you would need to know about the gunslinger to start experimenting with builds or to beef up your general game knowledge. A disclaimer before we begin. Destiny is a game that constantly changes and evolves. As such, the information in this video may become less accurate the further in the future you are watching this. Therefore, I would always double check to ensure that the information presented is still accurate. Without further ado, let's get into the video. Before we get into the specifics of Gunslinger, I think it's important to get an overview of the Solar subclass in general. Solar is one of the 3 light subclasses alongside Void and Arc. Solar in the current sandbox is incredibly potent. It contains everything that you would want in a PvE environment. It has 2 verbs which assist with healing, a verb that is a straight up damage buff, and it has damage over time and add clear verbs as well. Therefore, it is incredibly versatile and contains a lot of what you would need to cover every single PvE scenario. The only tool that it does not have is a way to debuff enemies, but taking into account everything else, it's safe to say that this isn't much of a negative. Now that we have a rough overview on the Solar subclass, let's begin by defining the subclass verbs that is relevant for Solar. Firstly, let's talk about Restoration. Restoration has 2 tiers, Restoration X1 and Restoration X2. This buff will constantly heal your health as long as the buff is active. Restoration X1 heals for 35 HP per second, and Restoration X2 heals you for 50 HP per second. The duration of restoration can be affected by fragments, such as the Ember of Solace and the Ember of Empyrean. The next one to talk about is Cure. Cure also gives healing similarly to Restoration. The only difference being is that Cure restores a big chunk of HP in one go, instead of giving health over time. Cure restores 60 HP per stack of Cure. However, keep in mind that after Cure activates, there is a 1 second cooldown where activating Cure again will not heal you. An example of this is Ember of Solace and Phoenix Dive. If your grenade kills an enemy while you have Ember of Solace and your Phoenix Dive activates less than a second after the grenade kill, you will not be able to receive the healing from Phoenix Dive as it is a cure. The final buff that Solar has is Radiant. Radiant is a buff that gives your weapons increased damage. You will get a 25% damage boost as long as Radiant is active. Not only that, being Radiant will also give weapons that do not have any champion counters the ability to stun barrier champions. The 2 verbs that you can apply to enemies that are linked to Solar is Scorch and Ignite. Let's talk about these together as they are related to each other, and Ignite relies on Scorch to activate. Enemies that are inflicted by Scorch takes damage over time. This damage lingers for 4.5 seconds and then starts decreasing at a rate of 5.67 stacks every 0.56 seconds until the enemy has no Scorch stacks remaining. If you manage to apply 100 stacks of Scorch on an enemy, they will ignite. Ignitions will create an explosion that deals 750 damage to any enemies within a 10-meter radius of the ignited enemy. This explosion has no damage falloff. Ignition damage can be increased if the Scorch damage that caused the ignition also has a damage increase. Any unstoppable champions that receives ignition damage will also be stunned. The class-specific pickup that the Solar subclass use is the Fire Sprite. Fire Sprites restore 12.5% grenade energy upon pickup. Allies are not able to pick up Fire Sprites that you generate, and they will last for around 25 seconds. There is a 5-second cooldown between generating Fire Sprites. Now that we have explained all the Solar verbs and pickups, let's continue by talking about the Solar grenades, as this is also shared by all the other Solar subclasses. Firebolt grenades shoots beams of solar energy at up to 4 enemies within an 8.5 meter radius on impact. It applies 20 Scorch stacks. It will deal 10 more Scorch stacks if you have the Embers of Ashes fragments. From now on, I will follow the format of saying 20 plus 10 Scorch stacks, with the former number being the amount of Scorch it applies without the fragment, and the latter number being how much more Scorch stacks the fragment adds on. It has a base cooldown of 64 seconds. Fusion grenades will stick on an enemy and then explode after a short time. The grenade has some tracking and will sometimes magnetize towards an enemy as well. It will apply 40 plus 20 Scorch stacks on detonation and has a base cooldown of 73 seconds. Healing grenades will apply Cure X1 and Restoration X1 to anybody within the range of the grenade impact. If you or an ally is not within the grenade's impact radius, it will spawn a white glowing pickup that applies Restoration X1 if you go near it. It has a base cooldown of 91 seconds. Incendiary grenades will apply 60 plus 30 Scorch on detonation. The incendiary grenade will do more damage if it explodes underneath or nearby an enemy. It has a base cooldown of 105 seconds. Solar grenades create a scorching field on impact. It does 11 plus 10 Scorch on detonation, and then 9 plus 5 Scorch stacks for each second that an enemy stood inside of it. The base cooldown is 152 seconds. Swarm grenades creates 9 seeking drones on impact that will lock onto nearby enemies. Each drone does 5 plus 3 Scorch stacks on detonation. The base cooldown is 91 seconds. Thermite grenades creates 4 waves of fire, one after the other. Each wave of fire will apply 10 plus 10 stacks of Scorch. The base cooldown is 121 seconds. The final grenade is the Tripmine grenade. This will stick on a surface and then explode when an enemy is near. It applies 40 plus 20 stacks of Scorch on detonation, and it has a base cooldown of 121 seconds. Let's move on to the melees, which the Gunslinger has access to 4. Knife Trick, Lightweight Knife, Weighted Throwing Knife, and Proximity Explosive Knife. Let's begin with Knife Trick. Knife Trick fires 3 knives that hit for 209 base damage. It has a 1.3x precision multiplier and does 20 plus 10 Scorch per hit. Its base cooldown is 82 seconds. Lightweight Knife throws out a single knife that does 300 base damage. It has a 1.3x precision multiplier and makes you radiant on a precision hit. Its base cooldown is 100 seconds. Proximity Throwing Knife will stick to surfaces for up to 14 seconds, exploding on impact or on proximity if an enemy is within 5 meters of the knife. It deals 246 base impact damage and 346 base explosion damage. Like the previous 2 knives, it has a 1.3x precision multiplier. It has a cooldown of 111 seconds. Weighted Throwing Knife will fully recharge your class ability with a precision kill, and it will also ignite any scorched enemy that it hits. The Weighted Throwing Knife also recharges on precision kills. It does 465 base damage and has the highest precision multiplier of all the Gunslinger knives at 1.5x. It has a base cooldown of 137 seconds. The Gunslinger has access to 3 class abilities. You have your standard Marksman and Gambler dodges, but you also have a new one called Acrobat's Dodge. Let's talk about what each of them does. Marksman Dodge instantly reloads your weapon, and it can activate effects that procs on reloads such as Kill Clip. All 3 dodges also removes aim assist as well as tracking from projectiles fired by combatants. The base cooldown of Marksman Dodge is 29 seconds. Gambler's Dodge grants 130% melee ability energy as long as you activate the dodge within 15 meters of an enemy. It has a base cooldown of 38 seconds. Acrobat's Dodge will cause all nearby allies to become radiant upon landing. It will also do 40 base damage upon landing with damage decreasing over distance. The base cooldown is 82 seconds. In terms of supers, Gunslingers have access to 3 supers. You may choose between Golden Gun Marksman, Golden Gun Deadshot, and Blade Barrage. Let's start with the Golden Guns. Both Golden Guns gives you 60% damage resistance while the super is activated. Their base duration is 12 seconds or 8.34% of your super per second. Golden Gun Marksman has 3 shots that deal 702 base damage per shot with a 2x precision multiplier. On a precision hit with Golden Gun Marksman, you will gain increased precision damage, 45.8% after the first precision hit and 90% after the second precision hit. It will also decrease the passive super drain by 25% and spawn 2 orbs of power. The base cooldown of Golden Gun Marksman is 556 seconds. Golden Gun Deadshot has 6 shots in the magazine and does 648 base damage per shot. Ignitions grant additional bullets to the magazine, with the Ember of Combustion allowing you to gain an additional bullet for every kill. The base cooldown is also 556 seconds. Blade Barrage releases 2 fans of 7 homing knives each for a total of 14 knives. The knives embed themselves on impact, dealing 79 base damage and detonate after 0.5 seconds, dealing up to an additional 407 base damage each. The base cooldown is 455 seconds. Alright, we have covered all of the abilities that are available to a gunslinger. Let's talk about things that may add more abilities or modify existing abilities, which are aspects and fragments. I will cover the aspects first. Gunslingers have access to 3 aspects. 2 of them will give you 2 fragment slots, with On Your Mark giving 3 fragment slots. You may freely choose 2 to use at any given time. These aspects are On Your Mark, Knock Him Down, and Gunpowder Gamble. On Your Mark gives you and allies within 15 meters of you a stack of On Your Mark upon scoring a precision kill. Class ability usage grants 3 stacks of On Your Mark to yourself. While On Your Mark is active, you gain increased handling and reload speed, as well as reduced reload duration multiplier for 12 seconds. This stacks up to 3 times. Values for these buffs are displayed for you on the screen. Knock 'em Down allows powered melee ability kills, while Radiant to fully recharge your melee ability. It also enhances all 3 Gunslinger supers. For Golden Gun Marksman, it adds 4 seconds to its duration. For Golden Gun Deadshot, you gain 15% more damage resistance. Finally, for Blade Barrage, it grants 3 extra knives in each fan, netting you a total of 20 knives. Gunpowder Gamble allows solar kills to charge up an improvised explosive. This readies at 6 charges. Weapon kills grant 1 charge. Ignition or Scorch kills grants 3 charges. Ability kills grants 4 charges, and super kills grants 6 charges. Once 6 charges have been obtained, it replaces your grenade with an ignition on a stick that causes an ignition upon being shot after it has been thrown or after 3 seconds. This incurs a 6-second cooldown after activating. Kills during this cooldown period do not grant charges. Now we move on to the final part of this deep dive into the Gunslinger, which are the fragments. Gunslingers share the same fragments with the other 2 solar subclasses, Sunbreakers and Dawnblades. If you already know what these fragments do by watching those subclass breakdowns, then you may feel free to skip this section. I will try to cover all the fragments concisely, but still delivering the relevant details to you. I will also note any stat buffs or debuffs that the fragments confer to you on the screen. Let's begin alphabetically with the Ember of Ashes. The Ember of Ashes allows you to apply 50% more Scorch to enemies, as denoted by all the times in this video where I have mentioned a plus when talking about how much Scorch stacks an ability applies. Note that some sources of Scorch do not follow this 50% buff, such as Caliban's Hand, Tommy's Matchbook, and Skyburner's Oath. Ember of Beams causes solar super projectiles to home in on enemies. This only affects Blade Barrage projectiles for gunslingers. The Ember of Benevolence causes applying Cure, Radiant, Restoration, Healing, or Reviving allies to grant 400% additional base grenade, melee, and class ability regeneration rate for 6 seconds. Note that Empowering Rifts and the Aeon Sect of Vigor's triggered healing will not cause the Ember of Benevolence to activate. The Ember of Blistering causes ignition kills to grant grenade ability energy based on enemy rank. Tier 1 combatants grant 8%, Tier 2 12.25%, Tier 3 6.5%, and Tier 4 combatants 25%. The Ember of Char applies 40 plus 20 Scorch to enemies damaged by the explosions from ignitions. This does not apply to the ignited enemy. The Ember of Combustion causes solar super kills to cause ignitions and spawn a fire sprite. The Well of Radiance causes all weapon damage to count as super ability damage for the caster. The Ember of Empyrean extends restoration and radiant effects by 4 seconds per kill. This duration cannot exceed 12 seconds. The Ember of Eruption causes your ignitions to have around a 20% increase in its explosion radius. The Ember of Mercy grants Restoration X1 for 2 seconds upon picking up a fire sprite. When you revive an ally, it will grant you and any allies nearby Restoration X1 for 5 seconds. The Ember of Resolve causes your grenade kills to grant Cure X1. The Ember of Searing allows killing scorched enemies to grant you powered melee energy based on enemy rank and spawns a fire sprite. Tier 1 combatants grant 8%, Tier 2 12.25%, Tier 3 16.5%, and Tier 4 combatants 25%. The Ember of Singeing will grant 300% additional base class ability regeneration rate for 3 seconds after applying Scorch to enemies. This will not affect if the enemy dies from the hit that would have applied the Scorch. The Ember of Solace causes restoration and radiant effects to last 50% longer. The Ember of Tempering allows solar weapon kills to grant plus 10 recovery for you and allies within 12.5 meters for 8 seconds. This can stack up to 3 times. While the Ember of Tempering is active, it grants plus 20 airborne effectiveness, and solar weapon kills spawn a fire sprite. The Ember of Torches causes powered melee hits to make you and allies within 8 meters radiant for 8 seconds. Lastly, the Ember of Wonder allows killing 2 enemies rapidly with ignitions to create an orb of power that grants 2.5% super energy. This will incur a 10-second cooldown upon creating an orb of power. That should cover everything you need to know about the Gunslinger. I will leave a link to the Destiny Data Compendium if you want to perform further research. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe and enable notifications to ensure that you do not miss any of my uploads. The next guide will be posted next Thursday and will be covering the Sunbreaker. Thank you for watching and happy farming.